Good evening and welcome to the Legal Roundtable. I'm Shanique Bookeray. Tonight we're talking to one of the most notable political figures in our state's history, Governor Edwin Edwards. His political career spans decades. He has served in all three levels of government as well as all three branches of government. He's the only governor in our state's history to serve 4 terms, twice as many as any other Louisiana governor, and the 6th longest gubernatorial tenure in the country. He's been called colorful, charismatic, powerful, and legendary, and he's here tonight to talk about his life and legacy in the state of Louisiana. Governor Edwin Edwards tonight on the Legal Roundtable.
I have made a firm decision not to seek a 5th term. For the last 40 years, counting primaries, non-contested elections, runoffs, I have been on the ballot 25 times. In all but one instance, in 1987, I led the balloting and was successful in the runoff. As soon as the public had an opportunity to correct the error of 87, it did so by re-electing me for a 4th term.
By the time Governor Edwards' political career ended at the end of his 4th term as governor in 1996, he'd been in various political offices for over 40 years. His political career began around 1954 as a member of the Crowley City Council, a position he held for about 10 years before becoming a state senator. Less than 2 years in office, he then ran for the United States House of Representatives in a special election called after the current congressman was killed in a car accident. He completed the term and served 3 subsequent terms as a U.S. congressman before beginning his first term as governor in 1972. He served 2 consecutive terms as governor from 1972 to 1980. Precluded from a 3rd consecutive term, Dave Treen was elected governor and served from 80 to 84. In 1983, he defeated incumbent Governor Dave Treen and was elected to a historic 3rd term as governor. At the time, he had not lost an election. At the end of his 3rd term, however, he was defeated in the primary by Buddy Romer and conceded the governorship to him, avoiding a runoff election. In 1991, in a 2nd comeback attempt, he faced former white supremacist and grand wizard of the KKK, David Duke, in a runoff. The race drew national attention, and following rallies and protests, Edwards was elected to an historic 4th term as governor of Louisiana. In all, he was governor of Louisiana for 16 years, twice as many as any other Louisiana governor, and the 6th longest gubernatorial tenure in the United States. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. My guest this evening is former Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards, and we're talking about his life and legacy in the state of Louisiana. Welcome to the Legal Roundtable, Governor Edwards.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's almost been 2 decades since you left public office, yet you continue to be as popular as ever. People are still concerned about your every move and everything you're about to do. Could you please tell me what do you attribute to having that type of longevity of popularity and the effect that you have on people?
Well, in your descriptions of me, you forgot to mention controversial. And when you're controversial in public life, people have an interest in you, some good, some bad, some critical, and some applauding you. But I think that I have a tendency to want to get involved and to help people and to do things and to see things happen. And since I got out of prison, I've been to probably 53 or 54 different cities and towns in Louisiana making speeches and talking about the current affairs and something about the history of our state. Last week I was in Mississippi doing that. Next month I'll be in Florida doing that. And I just stay active, and I do that because it's my nature.
And we can tell that you stay active, and I think you look great. Let's go back a little bit, back to your childhood and your upbringing. What type of upbringing did you have, and was it one in which you or anyone else would have expected that you would have had the life of public service that you've had?
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that I came from where I came to become the governor of a state. And what's important is not so much that it happened to me, but that it can happen to anybody's child if they wish to do that and spend that kind of effort to get elected to public office. I was born on a sharecropper's farm in 1927. My father had a third-grade education. My mother was a self-taught midwife with seventh-grade education. During her life, she delivered over 1,800 children, mostly to poor young women in the neighborhood where we grew up. My father, as I said before, was a sharecropper, but with only a third-grade education, but he was very, very, very interested in education and insisted that his children get as much education as possible. And for that, I'm very grateful. I went to school in a one-room schoolhouse the first 4 years of my life, no electricity, no running water, outdoor privy, and the teacher taught 4 grades at one time in 4 rows, first, second, third, and fourth. I had to listen to everything 4 times before I got out of the 4th grade. And then before busing was a legal and social problem, I rode a bus 8 miles into town to finish my public school education, then went to LSU for a while, then volunteered in the Navy in World War II. Thank goodness, although I was learning to fly, I didn't have to fight because the war ended. Went back to LSU and finished law school in 1949 at the age of 21.
Now, what were some of your career aspirations prior to law school? Because it's my understanding that at one point you wanted to be a preacher and actually preached a few sermons. Is that correct?
I was a youth minister in the Nazarene Church in my hometown of Marksville, and I also had a desire to be a country and western singer. But I soon learned that when I got away from my family, nobody wanted to listen to me, so I gave up that career. Later on in life, I decided I wanted to be an attorney because I didn't have the money to go into business and to make an investment. And by going to law school, I could do so with a minimum amount of investment. And as a matter of fact, I did, and I practiced law in Crowley until about 1965 when I went to Congress.
Okay, now, you have had a long life of political service, obviously over 40 years. You've been a judge, city councilman, state senator, U.S. congressman, and obviously 4 terms as governor. What first led you to a life of this political career? And what were your goals and what was your motivation for that type of career?
All I can tell you is that there's a gene in me that commands me to respond to public need. I have a real concern for people, especially those who do not have a voice, people that need help from government, and I've always believed that government was there to help those that needed help, not to afflict the comfortable, but to comfort the afflicted. And I think that's one of the reasons why I had some success as a public figure.
Okay, well, we're going to pick up with more from you in just a moment. We'll be back in just a moment with Governor Edwards on the Legal Roundtable. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. Tonight I'm talking with former Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards, and we're talking about his past, what's currently going on with the governor, as well as his much anticipated future plans. And when we left off, we were talking about what inspired you to go into a career, a political career. And I'd like to continue with that discussion, asking you, what do you consider to be some of your most significant accomplishments during the many years that you served the state of Louisiana?
From a governmental standpoint, the writing and adoption of the new Constitution in 73 and 74, it made it possible for us to streamline government from 260 agencies to 20 departments, made government more efficient and more accessible to people. That was a great accomplishment because no state had been able to write a new Constitution on the first try in 25 years. And while I had many naysayers who doubted if we could do it here, I went ahead, made the effort, got the support from the legislature, and the people of the state adopted the Constitution, and it's still in force today and serves us well. From a financial standpoint, the change in the method of collecting severance tax on oil and gas. When I became governor, we were producing about 3 million barrels of oil per year. Last year, it had reduced itself to where we only produced 77 million, an indication that the reserves are declining. We were collecting 25 cents a barrel on the production of oil. I changed that to 12.5% of value. At that time, oil was selling for $8 to $10 a barrel, and I predicted that someday it would go to $100 a barrel. And of course, my critics laughed and joked about that and said I was out of my mind. However, it has been at that rate for several weeks and has gone to $100 many times during the last decade. Now, that meant that the state got the benefit of billions of dollars of revenue paid for by the production of oil and gas, and paid for about 70% from people in other states that were using our natural resources. And that's something that has been a boon to the state of Louisiana and even today. In addition to that, in 1986, while I was governor in my third term, I wrestled from the federal government a tideland settlement on a long-standing lawsuit. We were paid $640 million in a one-time settlement. I didn't put it in my pocket, as many people suggest, or give it to my friends. I took $100 million and gave bus drivers, lunchroom workers, and school teachers a raise, which was badly needed. The other $540 million was put in a special constitutionally dedicated fund for education. And every year since then, every university and college in the state has received a bonus, extra payment from that fund. They could use it for buildings, research and development, hiring of professors, or whatever the administration of each campus thought was the proper thing to do. Now, the significant thing about it is the way it was structured. Since that time, the fund has grown to where, as we sit here today, it is $1.2 billion. And I can say to you with satisfaction, no other state, none, has such a dedicated fund for education. And I'm the only governor in the history of our state who left a legacy for the people of Louisiana, and I'm very proud of that.
That's wonderful. And those were some significant accomplishments that certainly have benefited the state. Let me ask you this. You've always been somewhat known as being minority friendly. You've always had significant support from the African American community. Could you speak to what you believe what that connection was as to why you have continued to have so much support from the African American community and why it still goes on even today?
I know what it is to go to bed at night and wonder if your child wakes up in pain at 2 o'clock in the morning, that you're not going to be able to get a doctor or medical assistance. I know what it is to see people without food. I grew up in that kind of an environment. I don't want it to happen to anybody.
Over his years of public service, Governor Edwards made significant contributions that led to the advancement of African Americans. Early in his career as a young U.S. congressman, Edwards was one of the only Southern congressmen to vote for the first renewal of the Voting Rights Act. He was the first governor of Louisiana to appoint blacks to high-level administrative positions. He was also involved in legislation that made it possible for the black community to elect African American judges, that ultimately raised the number of African American judges in Louisiana from about 5 to over 80 today. Additionally, he actively blocked any efforts to close Southern University Law Center in the early 1990s. The historically black law school is responsible for educating over 80% of African American lawyers and judges in the state of Louisiana.
Well, I grew up in a community where blacks and whites lived half a mile from each other. It was a rural area, but we worked together. I picked cotton with them. We sat on the same turn row at noon and ate our lunch, and I got to know minority people, little black kids who were my age. And when I was going to school in a school bus, the school bus, half empty or half full, depending upon your designation, would pass a group of little black kids walking to their school. And I thought there was something wrong with that because the bus had plenty of space for them. And I came home one day and asked my father, I said, why is it the bus driver doesn't pick up those little kids? And he said, son, that's one of the things that's wrong with this country. And someday it'll be changed. And maybe you'll be in a position to make that happen. And I'm very glad that later on in life, while a member of Congress, I was one of 2 Southern congressmen who voted for the Voting Rights Act so that it would open the polls to minorities. And that is something that has been a great achievement for the black people of Louisiana and the South generally, because it gave them a voice in government. Now, I have an empathy for all people who have a need, black and white. Doesn't make any difference to me, because let me tell you, no matter who you are, what you look like, if you stump your toe, it hurts. And if somebody sticks a pin on you, you bleed. And we need to recognize that we need to treat each other with respect and do what we can to make life better for everybody.
Okay. All right, thank you. We're going to pick up with more in just a moment. We'll be back in just a moment with more from the Legal Roundtable. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. Tonight I'm talking with former Governor Edwin Edwards, who over several decades not only served 4 terms as Louisiana governor, but also served in other local, state, and national positions across all 3 branches of government. And when we left off, we were talking about why you had such a connection with the African American community. I want to move on a little bit closer to most recent events, including the time you mentioned, and we all know that you spent several years in prison. Could you talk a little bit about how that experience was for you? I mean, because you were pretty much, I would say, on top of the world, so to speak. How was that experience for you then, being in prison for 8 years?
It's quite a letdown.
In 1998, Governor Edwards was indicted on federal charges after a mistrial and acquittal in previous federal trials during his 3rd term as governor. The former governor, who had recently completed his 4th term, was indicted on 28 counts, including racketeering, extortion, money laundering, mail and wire fraud, surrounding the awarding of riverboat gaming licenses. Edwards was found guilty of 17 counts, and at the age of 75 was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In January 2011, he was released from prison to a halfway house after serving a little over 8 years in prison. In February 2013, he was released from parole early due to good behavior.
I felt all along that the conviction was improper, and I'm not going to try to explain that or justify it here, but I was 75 years old. I'd gotten a 10-year sentence. The government finally convicted me after 4 times on the 4th effort. Before we had fair judges, the government could not get but 1 vote out of 36. The last trial, of course, where I was convicted, the judge went out of his way to aid the prosecution, and it resulted in a conviction. I knew it was unfair and wrong, but I walked into prison, held my head up, didn't whine or complain. I did what I could while I was in prison to help my fellow prisoners. I was chief librarian most of the time. I wrote letters for them. Many could not read or write. I read letters, sent letters to their family. Many were long distances from home and had no way of communicating. I walked the track with many of them, commiserating because they had some death at home, or their wives left them, or some tragedy, and it really was very heart-rending to see how difficult prison was for those people. I had a close family. I had a little money. I had a lot of friends, and I had family and friends support. Many of those people just had nothing, and I did what I could to make myself useful. I helped over 6 of them get a GED and was working with 5 others by the time my prison term ended, and I had to leave before we completed. But nevertheless, I walked out of prison as I promised my family, and looked back on it, and I did not whine or complain. I did not fold my wings and quietly go away. I stayed in the public eye. I've traveled the state. I've met with old friends and met new ones, and I just feel good about my life. It was a bad thing, But bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. But this is the one thing in my life that I wish I could undo. But I can't do that, so I'm just going to do the best with it.
Now, do you think that that experience would change the way you would govern now, or your position on any issues, having experienced what you've experienced in prison?
Basically, I'm a populist. I believe that government, in its combined efforts representing the public, can marshal our assets and do things that individuals cannot do. Individuals can't build roads or bridges or provide a public school system or common defense. That has to be done. It has to be done by government with the combined effort and support of the citizens. In the process, I felt, and I still feel, that government is there to serve those in need. Those who already have too much don't need any help from government, except that they have a right to demand and acquire a stable environment where they can live and enjoy life as they wish, and I applaud that. On the other hand, there are many people who just need a helping hand, and I always felt that that was a role of government that we should do. Take care of those who had no voice. Take care of the aged, the kids coming up, babies, and make sure that everybody had good health care.
Okay. Now, I would say that one good thing that we know all came out of this time in prison was that you had an opportunity to meet your lovely wife, and now you started a new family with, and I understand you have a new son who's born, Eli Wallace, and congratulations on that. And also, I think our viewers know that you all just recently finished your reality show. Could you just talk a little bit about how that experience was for you? Because I know a lot of people who do the reality type shows, they look at themselves on television and sometimes they feel like they were not accurately portrayed. Looking at yourself, do you feel that you were accurately portrayed, and how did you enjoy that experience?
I didn't enjoy it at all.
In the fall of 2013, the A&E reality show The Governor's Wife debuted on the A&E Network. The show, set around wife Trina Edwards, told the story of the couple's non-traditional family and their quest to have a child. The show also featured Edwards' two daughters, both in their 60s, and Trina Edwards' two teenage sons from a previous marriage. The show was met with mixed reviews.
I was glad to do it because it gave us an opportunity to show the public that we're just ordinary, decent human beings with family and with problems. And we went through it. It took about a year to do it, but during that time, Trina was pregnant and suffered a great deal, had a very hard pregnancy. But we worked around it, and she, like a real trooper, sometimes did filming when she was in great pain, but she did it. And going back to the other thing, you're right. I went to prison, and when the book was written, about 3,000 people wrote me and expressed some interest in the book. And I got a letter from this young lady who is a Republican, was a Republican, still is. And she said she'd read the book and was interested in my career and wanted to visit me. So she came to visit me and repeatedly came for the rest of my prison term. And during that time, we agreed to see each other. When I got out of prison, we did, and ultimately we got married, which I'm very happy. We now have a beautiful baby boy who's 5 months old as I speak to you today. And all I can say is they sent me to prison for life. I came back with a good-looking wife.
But I have to ask you about your future plans, because we know that that has been the question everyone wants to know the answer to. And I don't know if I'm going to get an answer to it tonight, but I have to ask you anyway. Are you going to run for U.S. Congress?
I can truthfully tell you I've received a lot of encouragement, and I'm looking at it. If I'm 86 years old, and I recognize that that's a problem. I recognize also that I've been in prison, and that too is a problem. But the district suits me very well, and I don't want to end my life with people saying the last thing I ever did was to go to prison. This might be an opportunity for me to continue serving the public, and I'm very disturbed about what's happening in our country, and I think it's time for somebody who has some experience at making people work together, try to represent us in Congress. And while it's a long haul and I'm not prepared to say I will run or not run at this time, I can truthfully say I'm looking at it.
I think the people would want to know, are you up to it? We know that it would be physical challenges, you know, with all of the traveling back and forth and everything. Is this something you think you would be up to should you decide to run?
Yes, I was in Congress 4 terms before, and I'm familiar with what it requires, and that's an advantage I will have over other candidates. In spite of the fact that my age may be considered by some as a disadvantage, nevertheless, I like to believe I'm still mentally alert and I'm not disabled. I sleep well at night. I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to feed Eli, and I go through the day without having to take a nap, so I feel good about myself. I'm very grateful for that. I don't claim any pride in it because it's just something that I was born with good genes. Longevity is very common in my life.
Well, you know, I wish we had time to go into some of these important issues that are out there. I'd love to get your views on some of these, but unfortunately, we're out of time. But I do really appreciate you stopping by to talk with us
Sure.
this evening. That's all we have time for on this edition of the Legal Roundtable. You can always keep up with what's going on the show at the blog at www.thelegalroundtableshow.com. Till next time, I'm Shaniqua Grant.